Have you ever had those thoughts? You know, the ones that just pop into your head and completely yank you away from what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. Or the kind that just feel like they're draining all your mental energy.
Exactly. Nagging worries, sudden distractions. It feels like a universal thing, right? Unwanted thoughts.
It really is. It's that monkey mind people talk about in mindfulness circles, these persistent, uninvited guests just showing up.
Always vying for attention, disrupting your peace. Well, today, we're doing one of our deep dives. We're going into an ancient text to pull out some, well, really practical strategies, step-by-step ways to handle these exact thoughts.
Sounds fascinating. What's the mission?
The mission is basically to distill clear, actionable insights for you, our listener, so you can maybe bring a bit more calm, more control to your own mind.
And what's the source text for this?
It's called the Vitakkasaṇṭhānasuttaṃ. It's an ancient discourse, Buddhist tradition, apparently delivered by the Buddha himself.
Ah, okay. So it lays out methods for dealing with these thoughts.
Exactly. 5 distinct methods is what it says for dealing with what the text calls unwholesome thoughts.
5 methods. Interesting. So it's like a mental toolkit.
Pretty much. We're going to explore these 5 techniques. They seem to be progressive, starting kind of subtle with redirection, and then moving towards more, let's say, direct mental engagement.
And the goal is inner stability. Focus.
That seems to be the idea, leading towards that inner calm and concentration.
Okay, so before we jump into the methods, what exactly are these unwholesome thoughts, according to the text? Papaka kusala vitaka, is that term?
That's it.
Right. And it's important, I think, that akusala often gets translated as unskillful, not just bad or evil in a moral sense.
Ah, unskillful. That's a useful distinction. So it's more about them being counterproductive for, like, mental calm.
Precisely. The text links them to things like craving, aversion, or delusion, mental patterns that, don't really help your well-being in the long run.
Right. And the goal isn't just to squash the thoughts, is it? There's something deeper.
Exactly. It's about transforming the mind itself. The text actually says the aim is for the mind to settle down, calm down, become unified and concentrated. Acharameva sita santihati, and so on.
So it settles, calms, unifies, concentrates. That sounds quite profound.
It is. And while these techniques were, originally taught to monks aiming for higher consciousness.
The principles feel pretty universal, right? For
Right.
anyone just wanting more mental clarity.
Absolutely. Cultivating a more stable inner space.
Okay, so let's get into it. Method number 1. Where does the Buddha suggest we start?
Well, the first one is surprisingly gentle, actually. It's about shifting focus.
Shifting focus. How does that work?
The text says, if these unwholesome thoughts arise because you're focusing on a particular sign or object.
A sign or object, like a trigger?
Yeah, basically. A mental cue could be a memory, a feeling, an image, anything that sparks that unhelpful thought. The method is to consciously shift your attention to a different sign or object, one that's wholesome or skillful. Kusalupasanyita.
So replacing the unhelpful trigger with a helpful one.
Exactly. And there's this great analogy they use.
Oh, yeah.
It compares it to a skilled carpenter or maybe their apprentice. If they need to get rid of a coarse, thick peg stuck in wood,
How do they do it?
they don't just try to yank it out. They take a fine, smaller peg and hammer that in right next to it or into it, and that dislodges the coarse one.
Ah, okay. So the coarse peg is the bad thought.
Right. And the fine peg is the new wholesome thought or focus you hammer in to replace it.
That's a really clear image. It's not just avoiding, it's actively replacing. That feels very practical. It actually reminds me of some modern cognitive techniques, too.
It does resonate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This ancient idea about the power of choosing where you direct your attention is fundamental.
Okay, so that's method 1. Replace the thought.
Right.
But what if that doesn't work? Sometimes thoughts are really sticky.
Right. If that subtle redirection isn't enough, the text moves to a more, intense approach. Still introspective, though.
Okay, what is it?
Method 2 is about deeply reflecting on the danger of these thoughts, their faultiness, their negative consequences. Odi novo, the text calls it.
Reflecting on the danger. So really thinking about why this thought is harmful.
Yes, and cultivating a sense of revulsion towards it. Dukkavipakati, the painful results.
Revulsion. That sounds strong.
It is. And the analogy here is incredibly vivid, maybe even a bit shocking.
Go on.
Imagine a young person, maybe dressed up nicely, feeling good about themselves, and then someone hangs a decaying corpse around their neck, a snake or a dog or even a human corpse.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The text says you should cultivate that level of disgust and horror towards the unwholesome thought.
So it's trying to create a really visceral aversion, not just intellectually knowing it's bad, but feeling how repulsive its effects are.
Exactly. It's not about self-blame, but a powerful recognition that these thoughts genuinely harm your well-being, just like carrying something rotten would. It's a strong internal pushback.
Okay. So first replace, then reflect on the danger and cultivate aversion. What if that still doesn't work? If the thought is really persistent?
Then we get to method 3, which takes a completely different tack. The almost counterintuitive.
How so?
You just try not to pay attention to them, ignore them completely. Asati amanasikaro apachitabo. Give no attention, pay no mind.
Just ignore it? That sounds simple, but actually doing it feels hard.
It can be very challenging, but the analogy helps clarify.
What's the analogy for this one?
It's simple. Think of a person with sight who doesn't want to see something in their field of vision.
Okay.
What do? They might just close their eyes, or they might simply look away.
Right. They don't engage with it visually.
Precisely. They don't fight what they see, they just withdraw their attention from it. Starve it of focus.
So the idea is to starve the thought of attention, but isn't that like thought suppression? I've heard that can backfire.
That's a really crucial point. It's different from suppression. Suppression is often an active pushing away, which can paradoxically make the thought stronger. This is more non-engagement.
Non-engagement. Explain that a bit more.
You acknowledge the thought is there, perhaps, but you don't feed it. You don't argue with it, analyze it, or get involved in its story. You just let it drift past, like a cloud you notice but don't climb onto. It's a conscious withdrawal of interest.
Okay, that makes sense. A subtle but important difference. Requires a certain awareness, though.
Definitely. Okay, so what if even that doesn't work? If ignoring it fails and the thought is still buzzing around?
Where do we go then? Method 4.
Method 4. This one's quite subtle, too. It's about attending to the calming of the thought formation itself. Vitakkasaṇṭhānasuttaṃ.
Calming the thought formation. What does that mean practically?
It's not just about calming down generally. It's about observing the actual energy or process behind the thought, and then deliberately, consciously winding it down, deconstructing its momentum.
Winding it down.
This is where that brilliant Walker's progression analogy comes in.
Ah, right. Remind me how that goes.
Okay, so picture someone walking really quickly. Then they think, hang on, why am I rushing?
Okay.
I should walk more slowly. So they slow down. Then they think, why walk at all? I could just stand. So they stand still.
Right.
Then why stand? Sitting is more restful. So they sit. And finally, why even sit? Lying down is the calmest. So they lie down.
I see. They're progressively choosing finer, more subtle, less effortful states.
Exactly. Abandoning coarser postures for finer ones. And that's a metaphor for your mental activity.
So you apply that to the thinking process itself, like consciously slowing down the internal chatter, making it less intense.
Precisely. You're not just changing what you think, but sort of dialing down the way you're thinking it, reducing its energy, refining the internal process from agitated to calm, moving from busy mental chatter to a quieter state.
That's a fascinating approach. Very nuanced. Okay, so we've had replace, reflect, avert, ignore, and now calm the formation. That covers a lot of ground. But what if none of that works? Is there a final resort?
There is. Method 5. And this one is described as using, well, force. Direct mental force.
Force. What does that involve?
It's positioned as the last resort when all else fails. The text says you should clench your teeth, press your tongue against the roof of your mouth.
Okay. Physical tension.
Yes. And then mentally subdue the unwholesome thought. Press it down. Burn it up with your will. The terms used are quite strong.
Okay, dude.
Apinagan sheet the bot, apinapit to the bot, bit the bubble.
Wow. Subdue, press down, burn up. That sounds intense. Almost like a mental wrestling match.
It really does, and the analogy reflects that intensity.
What's the analogy for this last one?
It depicts a strong man grabbing hold of a weaker man.
Okay.
Grabbing him by the head or the neck or the shoulder and just forcefully overpowering him. Subduing him, pressing him down, crushing him, essentially.
Yikes. So it acknowledges that sometimes you might need sheer willpower, a direct confrontation, to pin down a really stubborn thought.
Exactly. It shows the full spectrum, doesn't it? From the subtle shift of focus right through to this direct, forceful application of will when absolutely necessary. Mental discipline taken to its peak.
It really covers all bases. And what's the result? If you manage to apply any of these methods successfully...
That's the encouraging part. The text says applying any of them successfully leads to the same outcome. The unwholesome thoughts get abandoned, they disappear.
And the mind?
The mind becomes settled, calm, unified, and concentrated. That same state we talked about earlier. Santihati, sansidati, kodipoti, samadhyati.
So mastering these methods leads to that desired state of calm focus.
Yes, and someone who gets the hang of all 5 ways, a bhikkhu, or monk, in the original context, is called a vasi vitakkapariyaya,
Which means?
a master of the ways of thought.
A master of the ways of thoughts. That sounds like true freedom.
It really signifies that. It means being able to think what you want to think, and crucially, not think what you don't want to think.
That level of control.
And the text connects this mastery to cutting off craving, removing the fetters or mental hindrances, fully understanding conceit, and ultimately ending suffering.
That's the depth of it. Real mental liberation stemming from these practical techniques.
So, quite a journey through this ancient toolkit. It really shows that this struggle with unwanted thoughts, it's not new. But neither are the solutions. Practical step-by-step solutions.
Absolutely. And even though these teachings are ancient, thousands of years old, they feel incredibly relevant for us today, right? Dealing with all the mind chatter, the stress, the constant distractions.
Definitely. They offer something very concrete beyond just, understanding the concepts, the real path.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Yeah.
In this world that's constantly grabbing for our attention, what does it really mean to be the master of your own mind instead of just being pushed around by it?
That's a great question.
And how might these very specific ancient techniques actually offer a maybe surprising way to find that kind of profound freedom, something to think about?